that's kind of the thing, that absence of actual magic. It's hugely important to me, and getting into film. When we looked at these film effects, the first thing I looked at when I saw them is how the fuck did they do that? And I just really, really had to figure it out. And I think you figure it out now, and I'm like, I can explain it in the coldest way possible to someone.
Yeah.
And I go to see a movie, and I don't enjoy big effects films, right? Because I just see, a lot of overtime and a lot of work and a lot of pizza parties to say thank you.
I'm very pleased to have Kosta Lagis as my guest today on Life with Strings Attached. Kosta Lagis is the creative director for computer graphics at the Mill in Shanghai, with over 25 years of experience in film, advertising, and industrial design. He has worked extensively as an artist and technical director on films such as Prometheus, Man of Steel, and Deadpool, and has directed a number of commercial projects with clients such as Huawei, Oppo, and Mobil. He has an extensive technical background in illustration, photography, digital imaging, and audio production, and is currently exploring the technical and creative impact of AI-based imaging, leveraging this technology and leaving room to ponder the long-term ethical ramifications of its use. I've very much enjoyed my conversation today with Kosta Lagis. I hope that you do as much as I did. Kosta.
Hello, baby. We're back.
It's nice to see you. Thanks for being on Life with Strings Attached.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yes. We don't have to let the audience know this, but Zach, our tech, has been completely geeking out and pulling all sorts of information from Kosta's experience on the back end here. I think that Zach would be perfectly fine if there was no interview today and he just got started. We'll have a spin-off. We'll have a Joni Loves Chachi version of Life with Strings Attached. Tech Talk with Zach.
Anytime. So few people want to hear me talk about this stuff, so I'm always happy.
It's cool. Great. It's wonderful. There's as you know, Zach loves vintage tech, and there's a group of guitar makers who are also into high quality tech, let's say, in cameras. I know this will be challenged almost right away, but there's a group of Leica lovers amongst high-end guitar makers who show up with their Leica cameras, and they immediately see each other. And they talk about it, and it doesn't take very long before there's a small group of them standing around each other with their cameras showing to each other. And the thing is, they've got the latest and greatest iterations of them. And Zach walks up with not the latest and greatest version, but Zach's got a 1946 Leica that he walks around with, which somehow drops like the vintage cool on everyone. Yeah. Everyone's like, whoa, what's that? Answer, Leica I can afford. But it also is
cheap, man. Like a one from 46, I can't imagine would be chump change.
No, it's not. But it's interesting. We were actually in the Vatican the other day. Zach came to visit us, and we went to see Rome together. And some guy walked and stopped directly in front of him. Like, we were in progress. We were walking somewhere. Someone stepped in front and said, "Camera, hi, camera. We should camera." And they start pulling out cameras from they're both carrying 3 or 4 cameras, Right.
They look like war correspondents or Dennis Hopper from Apocalypse Now.
Yes, exactly. And but it's a great sort of illustration that, people have obsessions and they have specialties and masteries in different areas. And when you come across someone else who has, like you just said, not a lot of people want to talk to me about the technical details of this. When you find someone, you're all in, and we do that in the guitar industry, and I'm sure they do it in the camera and film industry and tech industry also.
Sure. For sure. But film cameras are amazing things to be obsessed with. I've got 1 or 2 lying around, like Zeiss Icon and an old Nikon. The Zeiss Icon's rangefinder style cameras to the M's. But the thing with them is, the funny thing, they're very hard to explain the appeal to this to people who just look at it and go, why would you take pictures like that? And I'm like, well, because I enjoy the process of taking pictures with this. and that's kind of the tough thing for people to rationalize until they try it. And then they develop film and they go through the whole process. They don't get immediate. You can't chimp on these things. You have to get it right. And then you're at the mercy of whoever's developing it if you're not doing it yourself. And then you get an image and you're like, oh, I actually really enjoyed that process and this mechanical thing that did it. So it's all romance, no practicality, but it's 100% enjoyable. And it does the job. That's the thing. So.
Yeah. It's parameters, design parameters to a certain extent, or conditional experience parameters to, if to get maybe overly technical, we experience it as musicians if we're plugging in to a Fender or a Marshall. As the iconic juxtaposition of amplifiers, that's effectively an experience filter. Like you're boxed in, you don't have the same range, and there's something about being dictated the parameters to be able to create within.
No, I completely agree. I play music as well, and when I started playing guitar, it was quite a while ago. But the way you got a big, huge, enormous guitar sound was by plugging into a big, huge, enormous guitar amp and turning it up excruciatingly loud. And that's kind of what I've always associated with that experience. So, you can get modelers and things and all sorts of stuff, and you can record and all the rest of it. But I try explaining to younger guys now that, pick up guitar and they're like, I got this quad cortex or fractal and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, but really, one day before you die, you really need to plug into a full stack and just feel it. And then you'll get it. Because there's nothing quite like it. You feel it in your bones. There's this.
It's visceral.
Feedback. It's awesome. And this is the thing, right? Like from a practical point of view, to a lot of people, it's just like, that thing makes no sense. It weighs, so much. And but from an experiential one, if that's even a word, sorry.
It is.
It's
yes.
It makes perfect sense because there's nothing quite like it. Same with film cameras, developing your own film, all these romantic little processes that people do. They're worth a tremendous amount, and I don't think it's as cold as saying I want to get from A to B as quickly as possible. It's like, no, I really want to enjoy the ride. The destination's actually not that important. The journey is. Sorry, so cliche, but I'm sure you get the meaning.
No, but we get it because we've all experienced it, one or two or the other, and sometimes it's really surprising when you're not a part of the tribe and you get a little insight. So a few years back, I had car trouble in another city. And we ended up renting a car to drive back home while my car went back on a tow truck. And my brother was with me, and he's from a small town in northern Canada. And my wife arranged the rental car. We just went to the airport to pick it up. And as we're walking towards our rental car, there's a convertible 5-liter Mustang there. And my brother's like, what about that one? I didn't have that response. But he's like, hey, is that one available? How much is it? And it was like, I don't know, it was like $10 more a day or something. So there was no, now we were definitely getting it, right? Like it was just like, okay, fine. Yeah, we did get it. And my brother was so excited to drive this car, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. I did. We got home and I took my wife out for a spin in this car because, it's kind of fun and sexy. And I started the car and the car went, and I went, really? She's like, oh my God. This is we're not really car people. We have decent cars, but we're not invested in the idea of the car and the culture of the car. And it was shocking to hear a V8 engine roar and my wife grip the seat and go, whoa, hey.
There's something to this, for sure.
Something to it.
you really like, even no matter how distant you are from many of these little, these subcultures or anything, you dip your toe in sometimes, and you start to you're like, oh, I can see that appeal, and I don't want to get too close because I don't want to get obsessed with that as well. Because we all have enough expensive hobbies, I think, to pick up another one.
Yes,
but yeah, yes. Cool.
Yeah,
alrighty.
Great. So you're. I'm going to let our audience look behind the curtain here for a second. So we actually tried to have this interview 2 weeks ago, and we had we'll call it technical failure. And so we're going to pick up this conversation. But truth is, we've already touched base recently. And so, but let's not forget, for the audience's sake, let's catch up again. Kosta, you are Australian, but you're currently living in Shanghai, correct?
I live in Shanghai, yes.
You live, and you've been there for a few years now?
Total of nearly 6 years.
Nearly 6 years. Okay, which is substantial. I mean,
it's quite a while.
Yeah, you have the holiday feel is over. You have a real idea of what the culture is like, right?
yeah, very, very much so. It's a place. It's funny. It's not like when you go to Japan, you have a great time, but if you live there, it can be a bit brutal. I found. But China's kind of the opposite. You get here and it can be pretty rough. You're like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you stay here for a little while, and then you start to have a fantastic time. So it's one of those sorts of places you just got to get used to it. But yeah.
Great. Yeah, the more and more I hear people going there, because a lot of our association with other countries, particularly the ones that are substantially different cultures than our culture, and we'll say our culture as the Western sort of culture that theoretically and philosophically comes out of sort of Greek, Roman, and Christian sort of background, let's say Judeo-Christian sort of background, is a lot of times our interaction with places are based on food and products, and so I remember this moment in the film Back to the Future. Marty goes back to 1955, I think it was, from 85 to 55, 30 years, I think it was. And he interacts with Doc Brown. And Doc Brown's like, oh, no wonder this failed. Look at this. Made in Japan. He's like, what do you mean, Doc? All of that stuff's made in Japan. He's like, what? Impossible. And now, there was a point in time where the only interaction with Japanese product was things that we paid them for that were very inexpensive. So we only associated inexpensive things. As a matter of fact, famously in North America, the Japanese cars came in as economy cars, and they couldn't sell past a certain price point. So they had to invent new car companies, the Lexus brand, the Acura brand. And all of them did it. Infiniti for Nissan, all of these brands. And there's a certain point in time where I realized there's a Honda NSX. It's not an Acura NSX in the rest of the world, right? But we couldn't perceive that high quality things could come from these places. And I think that currently China is one of those places where the Western world, there's some who know that, oh my God, much of the best stuff is happening there. And there's much of Western culture who still thinks they're producers of cheap things, which is a real disservice to the culture and their capacities. So when you go there and you experience it, you realize, oh, they're not behind.
Not at all. No.
They're quite far ahead, actually.
Well, yeah, and look, this is the thing. When I first when I got offered a job here with an Australian company, and I was like, well, I tell you what, I've been in New Zealand for I think 7 years at that point, quite a while, and I just said, I'll come over and have a look. Because I had no idea what to expect from China. And I had a lot of the same sort of preconceptions that you're talking about, and we do get a certain preconception in the West. And I came over to Shanghai, and it was absolutely not what I thought it would be. It was for starters, you just feel this insane growth going on. Technologically, they're building just this place so fast. It's crazy. And the next thing was the, how incredibly excellent the food is. Like people in Shanghai are very, very passionate about food. And to the point that my wife and I moved back to, in 2019, we moved back to Australia for 2 years, and we were just suffering for lack of food. in Brisbane, we were just like, oh God, everything's so bland and expensive and I can't deal with it.
Yeah.
But the thing is in terms of product, everything can get made here. It just depends. You can get excellent quality things made here. And there are people that can make excellent quality things. And you can get the opposite if you want. Metalworking, woodworking, anything, furniture, whatever. They'll do it well, or they won't. But they'll do it to your budget if you want to mass produce it. And there's, there is artisanal builders here. They're not very well known outside of China. But they make excellent stuff, tiny little build. Like there's a couple of guitar makers here. They're extremely boutique, that wouldn't be known outside of China at all. And their stuff's just excellent. I mean, I'm super fussy and I've tried it and I'm like, this is really, really quite good. And not cheap. This is the thing. It's not like, go get it made in China. It'll cost you half. No, it won't. Yeah. If you want it nice, it's going to cost you what it should cost you. So I think that preconception, it will probably go away. Not necessarily because cheap stuff's not made here anymore. I think there's a market for that, and that's a huge market for a great many things. But they will undoubtedly become known for some of the excellent things that they're doing, and there are a lot of them. And there are a lot of them that people are already unknowingly using. That are very, very reliable and work very well and are extremely well tested and stringent QC. So that was very eye-opening to me coming here, and it's just grown and grown since. I've never seen such growth in a place. It's crazy.
That's very exciting to me because I'm very much a futurist. I mean, I love where we've been, but I'm excited about where we're going. That's kind of a bit of a mantra of mine. I'm always looking to. What's your favorite this? Well, the next one, with the exception of my wife and my family. I've been very happily married to the same woman for 28 years and I have no intention of anything else. But in everything else, I want to try new food. I want to have new experiences. I want to play a guitar that hasn't done something that I've never experienced before, so on and so forth. I'm very excited about, I'm professionally curious. I'm always interested in new possibilities. And so the idea that we have a place like that where there's just this exponential sort of innovation experience is very interesting for me. That's it. I'm gonna ask Roberta to book me a flight now. I
mean, it'll blow you away. Anyone that's visited us here, they've come over sometimes reluctantly, and then they're like, "Oh my God!" They get here and they're just blown away. Like, you can't really buy a petrol car here anymore. Petrol scooters are completely banned. They have to be electric, and you're not allowed to beep your horn in the city and things like that. It's just a really nice place to be. How else can I say it? But they're really looking forward in a number of ways. So props to you, China.
Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com.
Well, Kosta, I'm sure some of our listeners are going to want to hear some of your unique perspectives and, unique backstory. And so, we read your bio before we start the episode, but, would you mind sort of giving me a bit of to date myself, the Coles notes, where these are just the important sort of steps along the way that if this little thing didn't happen, that you might not be who you are today, and not just professionally. I mean, if it's okay with you, just sort of like, are you born and raised in Australia? Key sort of moments along the way.
Okay. Wow. That's a big one to pull. No, it's okay. I was born in Brisbane in Australia, which is not one of the capital cities like Sydney or Melbourne. My parents are both Greek immigrants. So that was interesting growing up in Brisbane in that time. So that was in through the 80s. And yeah, I was never a sporty kid or a big. My stature, I'm quite a little guy. So, and my family, my brother and my dad are both weightlifters. So they're big guys. My brother's a record-holding weightlifter. So arguments were interesting. So, but I was always the sort of arty kid. I was always drawing pictures and reading books and things like that. And my mother was sort of nurtured that quite a lot when I was young. Would read me Tolkien when I was really, really young. Read me The Hobbit. Yeah, and a couple of other things as well, actually Alice in Wonderland and that the original books and the sequel as well, Looking Glass, which are quite odd books if you read them.
Most of us know the Disney version of it.
They are very strange, and also a lot of stuff from Roald Dahl. I used to read a lot of. Growing up, but I was very much a kid, because I didn't have the internet. We didn't have any of that growing up. I couldn't really watch the TV because, we had one TV and a family loved sport and things like that. So I was very invested in anything sort of fantasy or, any kind of escapism at all. So I was always drawing pictures, reading books, things like that. Anyway, I became quite good at drawing, and ended up going through school, and then before I'd finished school, I started to illustrate professionally and do commercial artwork back in a day where we used to use radiograph pens and airbrushes and things like that for it. So it was there was a huge amount of craft involved with that, and it was I think a good thing in hindsight to apply oneself at that age to that kind of thing, because I think it's something we brushed on in a very timely manner last time we spoke, where I was talking about learning from failure.
Yes.
It was a good thing because you only have so many options, and I didn't grow up in the city. We were kind of pretty far out from the city, so I didn't really have a lot of friends either because they lived so far away. So I was just constantly practicing, on the backs of envelopes and things like that. And I ended up drawing commercially for a number of years, and it was reasonably successful for like a 16, 17-year-old doing that kind of thing. And then eventually saw Jurassic Park and thought. I saw Jurassic Park earlier, than this, but you saw Jurassic Park, and then I think at a later age, I genuinely kindled the idea maybe you can do that, because I was quite good in anatomy and drawing the skeleton and the human form and things like that as well, and kind of looked into it and found this was not accessible hardware and or software. Back in the 90s, sort of early mid to late 90s, but there was a company, I think they were called Squirrel Tech or something. I can't quite remember the name, in Brisbane, and they had a Silicon Graphics workstation with a copy of Softimage on it, and Softimage was probably the earliest. There was another one called Alias, which I learned a little bit later, which. Went on to be Alias Wavefront, which created a program called Maya, which was bought by Autodesk, which everyone knows now. But Softimage was used for, Starship Troopers, Jurassic Park, I believe The Abyss as well, really early CG. And they said, yeah, you can use this to do things, but, it's going to cost you X amount. And so I rented it for the weekend. And I had to go there to use it. There was no way they were letting me take that thing home because they were like $250,000 back then. And this machine had no connection to the internet, nothing like that. And so the way I had to learn Softimage was by reading the manual. And this is like, I was a guy that didn't really know a lot about computers. And I remember this time fondly because you come at something with a certain degree of technical expertise and you develop that over time. But then there's stuff that you don't know. So you're kind of poking around in the dark, and you have these lovely, happy accidents. And you're not sure technically why this occurred or how you got there, but, it's this unique thing, and you did it by following this very clumsy process. And that's something, that worked. And a lot of what I did was that. And so you start to figure it out after a while. But that then led to a lot of interest locally in Brisbane. There weren't many people doing this kind of work. This sort of 3D graphics. And back then it was only print. I wasn't doing anything moving. And, that was hugely lucrative for me in the early days, doing that. Like something as simple, and we take it for granted now, but, one of the first things you learn to airbrush is chrome. Chrome
Sure.
logo,
Yeah.
and, putting that bloody horizon line on everything. So obviously the first thing I tried to do was chrome, and it was mind-blowingly easy, with Softimage to make excellent looking chrome. And honestly, I think I probably I probably did a solid year's work just rendering chrome. Various logos. I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is true.
No, I'm thinking some of the first CG I really remember is Terminator 2, and that was Chrome.
That's Chrome.
That had us all mind blown.
Well, the crazy thing is later on I realized CG that there was a CG sequence in Wrath of Khan, of all films. Which was this terraforming sequence was all done with CG. And there was also in the original Star Wars, before George Lucas decided he wanted to improve it, the old OG ones.
Yes.
There was a map of the Death Star that was a 3D vector graphic that they actually did with CG. And there was a film called The Last Starfighter.
The green one. The green one. That was actually CG?
That's CG.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, because a lot of stuff that I was familiar with, I was working with various agencies, and they were doing stuff with optical printing, and it was incredibly expensive to do. And you'll know that from Highlander and all these films where they were painting ghosts and then exposing it and doing this optical printing process. But that was optically printed, but it was generated in a computer first. And
sorry for my ignorance.
That's right.
CG is an acronym for?
So some people say computer generated image.
Okay.
Some people say computer graphics image. I like computer generated because it just grammatically makes more sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
But just wanted to be clear. That's sort of my assumption is that's what it would be, but let's know. Okay.
Computer generated is fine by me. I used to just call it 3D,
which is quite remarkable for Star Wars, considering their version of computers were these boxes with big light squares and shit on them, right? So the idea that they actually had computer generated graphics in that film, that was new. That's news to me. So let's not interrupt your story. So you were doing CG, Chrome, spent a year doing Chrome.
And so over time I kind of got better and better at it. But then something kind of pretty remarkable happened around about that time. Was it could have been a little bit later. This is quite a while ago, so my memory might be trimming the peaks off things. Microsoft ran an operating system called Windows NT back then, which was kind of their workstation class operating system. And then Microsoft purchased Softimage. And they did it solely for the purpose of porting it to Windows NT, which they did. So suddenly you had a machine that cost 1/20th of an SGI, able to run Softimage, as fast, if not faster than the SGIs could. And suddenly I could just do this at home. The computer you needed was not cheap, but compared to an SGI, it definitely was. I couldn't afford an SGI. I was then able to start running this software at home. And then you get really good at it because then a lot of people are using it. And as the user base expanded, so too did the communication between users, and then suddenly you're able to work things out. And so I got more into creature work at that point. Because I was able to fully understand things like inverse kinematics and rigging, which were, people coming out of school, I'd never heard that term, and people into 3D now, they're like, yeah, okay, but they take it for granted. This was really complicated back then.
Sure.
And so during that time, I got into this is a little side story, but it's quite interesting. I was in bands at the time. I was doing like electronic stuff and things like that. And I decided I wanted to play guitar over this stuff. So I bought a guitar and I kind of learned how to play it. And I went to get it repaired at a place called Ochateco Guitars. And one of the luthiers there is a guy called Dan Memory, who you know. And Dan and I remain really good friends to this day. But when I was there, they were, we got talking as they do, and I said, yeah, I'm a computer graphic artist and all this sort of stuff. And they were talking about wanting to get into machining, bridges specifically. And so I had a lot of what we did back then was done with a type of geometry called NURBS, or non-uniform rational Bezier splines, which is a geometry type that would allow us to make sort of smooth surfaces very easily before subdivision surfaces were a norm. If anyone doesn't understand that, it's fine. It just means we were able to make curved things,
Right. You didn't snap it to a grid of some sort.
Exactly. Because today what we do is we just use a lot of polygons, and it just looks curved. But back then it was mathematically curved, the surface. And in industrial design applications, we still use NURBS because mathematically they are curved. Then at no point when you zoom into that surface or when you measure anything on that surface are you dealing with polygons. It has to tessellate them or turn them into polygons to show you, because that's how graphics cards render them. But the data stored on disk is curved. So that's a key difference when you're like tool pathing at a certain resolution or whatever. It needs to turn it into something.
Yeah. I don't want to dive too deep into that, but Daniel's design is spherical by nature. Were you involved in processing the entire spherosity of the guitar?
No, that's 100% Dan.
Okay, all right. So let's skip past that. For those of you who don't know, it's Oni Guitars in Australia, ONI, and they really are truly remarkable. And we're checking out Daniel Memory. So carry on.
Yeah, he's a clever guy. So we. I was in Ochateco Guitars for quite a while, and I was doing this, I learned this package called Rhino, which is an industrial design package. I already had a background with working with NURBS in a package called Alias, and Rhino had the same NURBS engine as Alias, completely different interface. But
okay.
So I was kind of able to kind of assist there. And the best thing about that was, just the time spent there. We had a pretty good time doing that kind of thing and working it out. It took way longer than it should have, but it didn't matter. And the end result, this was really cool because it was the first thing I'd ever made in a computer that I was able to hold in my hand.
Yeah.
So and that was pretty awesome. So Gabriel Ochateco is still going. I think he's getting on now, but he had this design in mind, and we built it, and we held it, and I'm like, and what was even better was it worked really well. So it was, and that I think is something that I really loved, that experience of you design it. You're limited because it has to do certain things and it has to weigh a certain amount and it has to sit a certain way, and that kind of shaped it for you to a degree. And you and then we held it in our hands. So I kind of did that, and I got very much into in industrial design software and the process of it. And so over the years, I ended up developing a pretty close bond with a lot of clientele that deal with that kind of data. Namely car manufacturers, phone manufacturers. So one of my biggest clients for a long time was Ford. Also did quite a bit of work for Holden. But right now.
Holden is an Australian guitar company,
Australian,
which
yeah.
most of our listeners don't know about. But Holden is an Australian, owned by GM, are they not?
Yeah,
I think they're part of the General Motors Group. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how Australian they are these days, but they were very Australian
Well,
back then.
I don't think they were sold outside of the Australian market, which is why I call it an Australian car. So,
Yes,
yeah.
But then went on to, working with a lot of product companies that, they have this data and they want it represented or worked with or dealt with in some specific way. Mm-hmm. And that proved pretty lucrative. But ultimately, like, I was a creative guy. I liked, making monsters and things. So I ended up going back into CG and then eventually into film work. And that was, I think, the first probably really long-term large film experience for me was on a film called Fury Road in Sydney. Mad Max, yeah. And this is kind of a bit of a sad story. I think I can talk about it. I think it's okay. But I was brought on with a number of people and a lot of those people are hugely influential to me because I came in as a guy that did mostly advertising at that point. We dabbled in a few films, like we'd done a few little features, but I'd never been brought on as part of the crew of the movie. And we got brought on at the pre-production phase of that film. And sadly, that film was delayed during its pre-production phase, which went for nearly a year. And we didn't get let go. We got told that we could stick around if we wanted to work on Happy Feet 2, which was George Miller's other film.
Okay.
Or we could go and come back later, and if we wanted to work on Fury Road. I didn't want to work on Happy Feet 2. So I left. But during that process, during that year, we did a lot of really cool stuff. So that was when they were building the vehicles, and we went out to where they were building them. I can't remember exactly where that was, but it was about an hour out of Sydney. And one of the things I was doing at the time was scanning the vehicles. So basically using photo scanning techniques and also working with a guy called Jim who runs a company called Hedis to scan the actual cars with laser scanners. After we spray them with this coating of mud and water because they're too shiny, so you can't hit them with lasers. But some of this was the most insane thing I'd ever seen, these vehicles, because they really are incredible in person when I went there. And I've seen very few things to match that scale of practical production since. Like, that dedication, how much they made was insane. And some of it they were making specifically to destroy, which was, and I really wanted to take some of these vehicles home. Of course you'd be, you'd look like a total psychopath driving home in one. But they were incredible. And like, they didn't just look cool. Like, the functionality of these cars was brilliant. They were not driven from the cockpit at all. They were driven from pods that you could attach to either the front of the car or the side of the car. And that's where they were operated from. So that, because the guy in the car's not driving.
The actor wasn't driving, yeah.
Oh, God, no. But how they set that up was extremely cool. Yeah. And, okay, so Fury Road was where I got interested in stereography and the very, very technical side of cameras. Because originally we were going to shoot that film as a stereo film. With an actual stereo camera setup. There was a couple of them floating around at the day. I think the common one was the Pace rig that I believe James Cameron used for Avatar. But what ended up happening was we did a whole bunch of testing where we used these Dolce film backs and had to write our own debayering algorithm and all manner of things. So we were actually working on building a stereo camera that was small enough to get into the canopies of these cars, because stereo camera rigs, if you've ever seen them, they're quite huge. And George Miller's like, I can't shoot with this. And he's a pretty old school guy and he wants to move around. He wants to, freestyle it a bit. And there's no way you're freestyling with these giant stereo rigs.
Right.
Later on, they decided to not shoot it in stereo. and shoot it in mono and post convert it. But I was very fortunate because I got to learn a bunch of stuff while we. And this is the best way to learn about stereo. It's like okay, we're going to build a rig from the ground up, and they were doing all sorts of things. We had a guy with military gyroscopes inside it, and all sorts of cool things. And that information was overload. But something as simple as debayering, I didn't know about before that, and a lot of people still don't know about that your digital camera is actually colorblind, that it does not see color at all. This is a crazy concept, but it's true. All right, so over the top of your sensor, there's something called a Bayer array, and it's basically a mosaic of colored gels. The camera sensor is, in the simplest sense, an AD converter. So all it's doing is turning photons into a value. It doesn't perceive color. It assumes that pixel well is red, and that one is blue, and that one is green because of the Bayer array over the top. And that Bayer array is filtering all the light but the red, but the blue, but the green. And so each pixel is technically seeing a value of one assumed color, and every other color is interpolated from that. It's incredibly lo-fi when you think about it. And it's probably one of the reasons why, up until very recently, there was this filmic color look that people struggle to get, because a lot of the color in digital, like especially if you're going down to let's say a 12 megapixel sensor like the Sony A7S or whatever, that thing is only seeing 1/3 of that in color resolution, and then if you go to 422, it's also interpolating every second line of color when you export it. So your color is actually not the same as your luma, which is why, like the Leica monochrome, for instance. Sorry, I'm getting a bit technical, but this is
carry on.
The Leica monochrome is a really cool camera. I really like it. I really want one, but my wife will kill me if I come home with one of those, because she knows what it is. That's the problem. I can't. So, but it's so cool, because what they did was they took a camera and they just pulled the Bayer array off it. So that thing has no Bayer array. So it's just capturing luma, and you get an extra stop of light because there's no Bayer array blocking the light. But your image resolution is not limited to your chroma resolution. There's no interpolation going on in the image output, so it's 1-to-1 pixel resolution. So that's why that's such a cool little camera, because people don't get it. They're like, "Why is this cool?" And I'm like, "No, it's completely different. Like it's not interpolating anything." And then you get a fovean sensor from Sigma, I think, but that's a different tech again, and not very effective, to be honest. But so anyway, we got into that, and from there, I because we all got let go, I sort of went around Sydney at various post houses there. And that was quite a cool time to be in Sydney, because Animal Logic was I think still a pretty amazing post house. I think they're owned by Netflix now. But they did really cool stuff. So they were doing Lego Movie at the time. They were just starting, and they wrote their own render engine. They started as an excellent software. They've been doing CGI longer than ILM have, just in case people don't know who they are. And we went there, and I went there to do, I think, a Coca-Cola campaign or something. But in your spare time, you were put on the Lego Movie, and to make the assets for the Lego Movie, we were literally building them from CG Lego blocks. It's quite cool. But from there, I think I went over to, without going into too much like the in between stuff. I ended up floating around in Sydney for quite a while. And then eventually worked on a place called Fuel, which is no longer there, sadly, on Prometheus, which was the Ridley Scott Prometheus film. And that was shot on stereo. So that was shot with a stereo camera rig, and that called for a certain type of expertise, because post-production in stereo is, the producer would think, this is going to cost twice as much. It doesn't. It costs like 4 times as much. Because what happens is you can't cheat anything when you shoot in stereo. You have a triangulated depth that is visible to the human eye when you converge those two cameras together. So if you put something at the wrong depth, you can tell straight away it's at the wrong depth. So you can imagine if you want to do something as simple as put a coffee cup on a table in 2D, it just needs to really stick to the table and not kind of get bigger or smaller. In stereo, it needs to sit at the depth the table was at relative to the camera. So there's this degree of scale, and scale is linked to the interocular distance of the camera, so how far apart they are. And this is enormously complicated to work with. So I did Prometheus there, and then I moved to New Zealand to work for Weta Digital because I desperately wanted to work on the Hobbit films. And the first thing that
you did.
And I did, yeah.
Yes,
but the first thing that they put me on when I got there was Prometheus again. So I think I have 2 film credits on Prometheus, which is great. But we did some awesome stuff on that movie, and that was the beginning for me. I was just obsessed after that. So it went from illustration and print and working on something as simple as Mitre 10 magazines and stuff like that, which is a hardware store. I don't know if they have it in the States, but and then over to film work eventually. And what I can absolutely say with certainty is, like, I was good at what I did, but a lot of people were. But those opportunities to get into those those roles, it was always based on being in the right place at the right time, and often just knowing the right person. I think the Fury Road gig kind of changed my life in a way because it set it off on this trajectory. Yeah. And that was just an off-the-cuff recommendation of a guy I had worked with, prior, that recommended me there. I'm sure there were better people for that role, but, his recommendation carried quite a bit of weight. And I've never really forgotten that. And I think it's curious when you meet people that, they really do think they're entirely self-made. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure you didn't get some help where you didn't notice? But yeah.
That's why I asked the question the way I did. The moments that maybe you wouldn't be who you are if these moments didn't happen. And there's an openness and a curiosity, but then there's also just some fucking dumb luck of when you come across a moment. You got a break. And that was a break. It had nothing to do with you. It was a break.
It didn't. And honestly, one thing I try to do at this stage in my career is pay it forward. If I see someone with ability and talent and a real, a drive, you gotta fuel that a bit, and put them forward and try to step them up, because that's what you got, that helped you. And but something as simple as the stuff with Dan and Gabe, what I was talking about with the nerd stuff.
Yeah.
Without doing that simple little thing. Wasn't that simple, but without encountering without encountering that, and like if I didn't hit it off with those two, I wouldn't probably have learnt as much as I do about Class A surfacing, which led to a whole very successful part of what I did and continue to do to this day. That probably wouldn't have been there. I think we are sort of swimming around in chaos, and you have to thank your lucky stars sometimes. You can't be a fool, but
that's right.
You can't say it was all me. Yes.
No, you don't get the second recommendation if you completely fuck it up once you get in the door.
That's true. You have to be careful.
All right, so you're in New Zealand. You're working on Prometheus again. And you're headed. You had made a mention of The Hobbit and such.
The Hobbit.
So what's the next sort of step for you? So you're in the door. You're there in New Zealand. You're on crew. You're working on Prometheus again. Good for you. What's the next sort of substantial thing then?
Okay. So this is super interesting. So after Hobbit, because we did Hobbit, and Hobbit took a long time.
Wait a second. You can't just skip from Prometheus to I'm on the movie that I moved to a new country for, and my mother read me the books as a child while I wasn't watching the TV because my older brother who could keep my ass occupied it. Sorry for the interpretation. But I had one of those too. So, so you have to give a little bit of this kind of dream moment, no?
Yeah, it really was. But so was Prometheus in a way, because Giga is probably was my favorite artist growing up. With his artwork. I was blown away the first time I saw it, and I never thought I'd get to work on an and I saw Aliens when I was far too young. I'll get into that a bit later. But so this is like, man, doing a shot with the space jockey in it, this is like, oh God, I've made it. This is brilliant. And you get over that after a while. But Hobbit was pretty magical to work on. I never thought I'd get to work on that. I mean, my opinion of the film, I'm kind of allowed to talk about this. I don't think it's a problem. I would have preferred if Guillermo del Toro did direct it. I've got to be really honest. Peter Jackson's great. He is a good director and all the rest of it, but he does things a certain way. And Guillermo's movies I really like. I love how odd they are and unique. And he originally was going to do it in a little bit more of a compact way. And I love the book. I've read it several times. And it is. It's a little fairy tale type thing. It's pretty harmless, and it's super, conservative kind of ideas of good and evil and all this, and it's very base in that way. But the movie, it was awesome working on it. We loved doing the dragon. I still think that's the best dragon that's ever been on screen.
Did you work on that? You said you featured creature movements. Is that part of what you did?
Weirdly, on Hobbit, I wasn't doing creatures because I got too much into cameras and optics and stereo and really technical sort of things, and I kind of regret that in hindsight, but I also don't, because I did creatures elsewhere. But we did do one scene, just to give you an example, on Prometheus, where the abortion scene, which everybody knows, where she pulls the squid out, and it was me and I think two other guys, Oliver and Martin, if I recall. We had to get that wound onto her because they didn't film that. The pincers, of course, going into her belly, and that was filmed, and we had to get all that in there in stereo and completely lock to her gut and get the pincers in there at the correct point and do that sequence and make it work, and that was sort of hugely satisfying on a more visceral level. But the creature stuff, no, I did more of that in Sydney. And occasionally now as well. But on Hobbit, no, sadly, I didn't do any of that there. I moved more into the environments department, or terrain, as we called it at Weta, which was extrapolating data from LiDAR and things like that. So it was a little more technical. I think, honestly, what ended up happening, modeling, because I was primarily a modeler for many years in Australia, and I was very good at anatomy and characters, faces in particular I was quite good at. But that, as 3D became more and more accessible, that particular skill set, it became extremely competitive. There were a lot of people, because it's so appealing. People want to make monsters, they want to make creatures. It was just saturated with people. And I think at that point I was like, well, I kind of want my wage to keep going up, so I'm going to try. So I want to try and get into something that is a little bit more, it's not as well known, and it's not something that people necessarily jump up and down to get into. And those are the more technical sort of sides of things. But I was also into lighting and rendering and surfacing and working with a bunch of things. But So, sorry, it's a bit of a roundabout answer because I'm putting a lot of years into
Yes,
yeah. But no, Hobbit was more of a technical role, and a lot of the time, whatever it was that, but that was fine by me at that point because I think at that point I was in my 30s, and by then what I'd started to do was separate what I wanted to do creatively from my professional life. Because I think I had a few experiences. There was one, I'm not going to tell you which film this is because I don't have a credit on it and I don't want one.
Okay.
But I did a creature for it, and I thought the original creature we made looked quite cool. And then the client started sort of messing around with it. The director started messing around with it, and it ended up looking, I thought, pretty terrible. And I think at that point I was like, when you do kind of put this creative element into something like that, and then someone just comes along and just wants to muck around with it, because it was an anatomically functional. It worked. I put a huge amount of time into this, and then someone comes along and just says, make the fingers longer. And you're like, dude, it can't walk properly anymore. It's So I kind of got a bit over it at that point, and I continued to make creature stuff, but I kind of do it my way and I do it for me, because the one thing I liked about the more technical stuff, at least professionally, is it's very cut and dry. Like it either works or it doesn't.
Yep.
Nowadays I'm doing both, because you do miss it. You can't be, some people can, but I found not for that long I could just deal with numbers and angles. But yeah, on Hobbit, that was 3 movies of it, and we were all pretty tired of it at the end. Particularly the last one, which was made very quickly. The third one. But look, I thought they were cool movies. I went and saw them, and they were great to watch. And from a technical level, they were 48 frame per second stereo, which people weren't very used to seeing. I don't know if you actually saw a version of the film in that format with the 48 FPS. But
I don't know that I can identify that I saw it in what format. I'm sure I saw it on a television, on Netflix or something.
If you didn't see it at the movies, it was probably in 24. And this is a really interesting thing. So 24 frames per second looks like film. And 48 looks like video. It's too smooth. Right, it gets that Days of Our Lives kind of look to it. We were sitting there working on this, undisclosed budget, size film, and we were in dailies looking at it, and I don't think anyone wanted to say it, but it's just like, this kind of looks a bit like video, and it did, but in reality there was a really good reason why that was done, and I think this is where I get a bit upset with people, because they'll look at it and they'll say, it looks like video. And I'm like, no, it looks that way because there's far less motion blur and there's more frames. And that's important for 3D. If you actually want to make something in stereo in 3D, you don't want motion blur, because motion blur doesn't resolve well in stereo. It looks weird, like a nebula. So that's why that was done. And then Ang Lee took it even further with Gemini Man. I think he did it at 90 frames a second at 8K. And the data on that would have been horrendous. And luckily, I just missed out on that one. But yeah, so A Hobbit was great. And, watching those scenes and being involved with that, and the sets were extraordinary. They were quite remarkable what they built for it. But it was a pretty cool moment where you're working on something that you loved as a kid. You see it, but I still think the best version of The Hobbit I saw was actually a stage play in the 90s, which was really well done, really beautifully done, and it was bang on exactly the book. They had actually cut a bit out. The movies were great; they were great movies. But if you read that book, you sort of ask yourself, well, how much of a movie did they really have here? There's not much that really happens in that book. It's pretty brisk. The characters, the dwarves, they're not that sort of well explored, and everybody's got a different idea of what they are. So, they can be forgiven for wanting to flesh that out a bit more. I think that's fine. And yeah, we saw it, we loved it, and I was like, where to from here? We've done this. And then, the Marvel train sort of started. It was just everything Marvel. And then DC started. But I did...
and you worked on both Marvel and DC films.
A hell of a lot of both, yeah. I spent 11 months on Man of Steel, which is a very interesting movie because it was shot on film with in the anamorphic format. It was shot with anamorphic lenses on film, which is not something that's really done anymore. So, and the process of working with film scans on a feature film is you've got to be committed to want to do that anymore. Some people still do it, but an effects heavy film, shot on film it was full on. So but anamorphic is crazy again because when you shoot the film, you have an offset film back. You leave a section of the film for the sound strip that's meant to be there that doesn't go there anymore. But everything still conforms to the format because of the equipment that shoots it. And when we see anamorphic digitally, it's much easier, of course. But when we see it, you get these J.J. Abrams flares all over everything, but it looks what people would say is cinematic. So 24 FPS on anamorphic film, they think that looks really cinematic. And what I think is contributing to that is the fact that anamorphic as a format, and I'll explain what it does in a minute, it warps the image even more than your eye is used to. Because one thing that I found, in researching what cameras do and what even a standard photography lens does, it doesn't see the way your eye sees at all. It doesn't focus the way your eye focuses. That's not what these devices do. So the further you get from the way your eye sees, the more your brain kind of starts to fill in the gaps. And that's when things are really, really effective. So you still recognize what you're seeing, but the more it fills in, that's why 24 FPS is so effective because it's flickering, and then, people see things with really shallow depth of field and they think, oh, that's so cinematic and creamy bokeh and, this sort of stuff. But your brain is sort of taking that in the peripheral of your sight, or sometimes in the forefront. And it's the best word for it is dreamy. You see it as this warped, in a very pleasant way. Warped is kind of negative. I think this altered sense of reality, and suddenly your disbelief is suspended much more easily when you can do that. If you shoot it dry as hell on video, right? And there's no really deep depth of field, nothing's out of focus, really high frame rate. People will look at it and say, that looks cheap.
Yep.
But if you shoot it on 24 FPS film with anamorphic lenses, it looks nothing like reality, but it looks super cinematic, which is super important. And there's vignetting, which is hugely important, chromatic aberration, hugely important, all these things that we're used to. So just so anyone knows, and this is the crazy part about anamorphic. Anamorphic is the way we get super wide, aspect ratio. And the way they originally did it was they had a piece of Super 35 film. Super 35 is APS-C for anyone that's wondering. So roughly half the size of a 35 mil, which is called small format traditionally. Okay, so it's a crop of small format, and then what they would do is, in order to shoot it wide, they would put what's called an anamorphic element on the front of the lens, or have an anamorphic lens that bends the image and squashes it. And that enables them to use more of the film. So they could get a wide image and actually squash it into a piece of Super 35 film. They wouldn't be wasting as much film, and film is expensive and always has been. So they're using all of the film to capture the image. And then when they would project it, they would have a reverse anamorphizer, and that would expand it back out, called de-squeezing. So that's kind of this anamorphic, and that's where your weird flares and everything come from. It comes from squeezing it in, then squeezing it back out. And so yeah, he shot that on film with anamorphic lenses. And that was a crazy thing to deal with for us. Even at Weta, we're just like, oh dear, it's been a while since we've seen this. So, and then of course, they do this, and then he's like, okay, I want to replace everyone's body. And there was a scene on Krypton. We did the Krypton sequence primarily in that movie. It was years before I watched it. I was so like burnt out by it. I didn't want it. But there was a scene where Russell Crowe's fighting Michael Shannon on Krypton, and in the film, that's 2 stunt doubles, and we replaced everything for them. So we basically animated over the top and replaced the characters. And I remember at one point, the only thing left of the original plate was the stuntman's ear. But we kept it. just to say, we kept it, so that one little bit of footage was left. So yeah, that's kind of the Weta jib. But I'm going quite fast here, but I'll get to the Weta thing. The one of the last things I did there was probably one of the most satisfying things I did there, which when Peter finished The Hobbit, he's sort of back. He's a big time war history enthusiast, and there was an exhibition that he wanted to do at Te Papa, which is the Wellington Museum, which is awesome. If you're ever there, go and see it. And he wanted to do a World War I exhibit, and what he wanted to do was actually rebuild the beach of Gallipoli, and it was me and a guy called Nathan Lane, who's an awesome guy. He looks a lot like one of the Gibb brothers from the Bee Gees, and he talks in the thickest Australian accent you've ever heard. But he's an absolute genius level intellect on this guy. And what we did was we had drone footage of the beach of Gallipoli, and we were tasked with actually building a geometric representation of it from that footage, which was called DEM data, which is digital elevation model. And then Weta Workshop, which is the practical part of Weta, they machined this out, this whole beach and build it. So we had this completely accurate scale model of the beach of Gallipoli that we built. From this, and he made this insane exhibit. I think it's still there. It was only supposed to be there for a year, but they kept it there permanently. And I remember that I got that sort of sense because I went to see it with my wife, and I was there with Nathan, and we looked at it and just like, there's our baby. That's and people are looking at us like, what are you're weird. That's like one of the least interesting things here. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
You don't know how accurate that is. So, but from there and at Weta, I got, very deeply into, scan technology, meshing scans. It's also where I got into photo scanning, which has, become an industry norm because it's almost taken for granted how easy that is to do now. And that all sort of spawned from those departments that I ended up in. And I was always a person that what I wanted to do, I felt I should do in my own time, and really enjoy it and love it and continue to love it and do it on my own terms. So I did that, and what I ended up doing in my creative career, if technical career, whatever, I think it's still creative, to be honest. Was whatever was needed, whatever I saw there was a need for, or what we didn't know how to do. That was super interesting. It's like, oh, let's figure that out. That was crazy cool. And there's still stuff like that, going on now, even at the mill in Shanghai. There's still a bunch we just don't know how to do, and we have to figure it out as we go. So anyway. Sorry, that took quite a while, but that's the abridged history.
That's great. I love the actually the part that you just said. That common sort of thread throughout it was you have a history of innovation and getting in there on things that there's no one quite doing yet. You're one of the first that are making it happen. It's a big challenge, so you have to figure it out. And it sounds like there's been a few times where you felt pretty burnt out by the end of the process, but you still take on the next challenge instead of just laying on your laurels and and doing what you did well before.
The trick is not getting burnt out in the middle, that's a tricky thing. But you got to know, and I think when you've had a few successes, when you see that it takes an awful lot to shut a production down. We've delivered some films that, at the time we're just like, really, is this going to get finished? And it really does. It gets finished. There's one in particular I can talk about, fortunately, that was quite cool, which was when Paul Walker passed away. And we had to put the digi-double in for him in the Fast and Furious movie because he wasn't there. And the interesting thing about this is, if that happened now, that'd be no problem. Yeah, we can deepfake the crap out of it, no problem. But back then we did not have deepfake. It simply didn't exist. So we had to put together this digi-double of Paul Walker, and we did it entirely with a digi-double of his face. We had existing scans of him and stuff like that. But the craziest thing happened on this, where I started to really notice some nuances in facial performance and things like that, was because we dealt with a lot of mocap, and there are things I'd love to tell you that I sadly can't, but I will one day in person. This one thing is quite cool. Is we did a facial capture of his brother. Yeah. To get a performance out of it. And then we applied that facial capture to Paul Walker. And what it ended up looking like is incredibly strange. It ended up looking like Paul Walker doing an impression of his brother. And, it was really weird, and so we're like, shit, because we didn't have a lot of time to do that. That film had to come out at a certain date. So, but that was one of those moments where, a relatively small number of people got involved to just figure out how to do this, and it was very satisfying, when it worked out, because people said, you can spot it. And I'm like, yeah, look, there are some shots where you can spot it, but trust me, there's a lot where you can't. And they're the ones you're not noticing. So, yeah, of course. And I'm like, it's better than you think.
Yeah, it's just occurring to me. I think there's something else I saw in your filmography. Were you involved in, by chance, the replacement of Philip Seymour Hoffman's character as well?
In Hunger Games, no.
In Hunger Games, no.
No,
but the same thing had to happen, did it not? Like, I believe he died during the production, and they still had unshot scenes, and so that process had to.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, now there's films started that way. I mean, we have Star Wars films with Carrie Fisher's Princess Leia, where I don't think she was in at all at this point, or Grand Moff Tarkin, is that his name? I think, yes. That sort of character, and yeah.
That one was kind of famous for not being terribly well done. I think it was a bit brutal to expect that, to bring Peter Cushing, back to life in 4K that close. I'm like, Jesus, that's got to be rough. And they did a good job with what they had, but I don't think
it was like for his family, assuming he has family. I don't know.
Yeah, there might be still some of them around. But, I think, the recent one I saw was Alien Romulus, where they brought Ian Holm back. I don't know why, but they brought him back, and it was done with deepfake. And it looked definitely better than it would have looked using 3D digi-double in the time they had. Did it look convincing though? I sometimes yes, but other times you could tell something was wrong. It's.
I mean, this is our future at this point in time. I mean, I saw on Instagram the other day some video of Biden and Trump hanging out and being like best friends and riding horseback together and like going all over the world, best buddies having a beer, all that. I'm making up the scenarios, but it was all of these kind of like, a bros moment between Trump and Biden. And you're looking at it going, that's pretty damn convincing. Like, and so the big thing in AI at this point in time, one of the people who are deeply into it, one is emotion, and two is, at some point in time, we're all just not going to know. Did that happen? Did that not happen? And there's going to be this sort of sense of reality, unreality, and developed, I presume, in films for fantasy. And now that technology is being used in other ways. Yeah.
In concerning ways, I have to say, because one really interesting thing that plays hand in hand with that is what we've noticed from data is the rapidly decreasing attention span of people looking at media. Mm-hmm. And so, once upon a time, and this is really tied in with how effective AI-generated images actually need to be convincing, mm-hmm. because no one's looking that closely at this stuff usually. What we used to do is let's say, for a short format production, typically a television commercial, the most important one was the 60-second or longer. Mm-hmm. And that would maybe make it to the movies or something like that. The most important edit for them now, at least the clientele here, is the 5-second cut. That's the one that they stress out over the most, because that is that. And even now, we're getting people that think 5 seconds is too long. We need to get the entire point home, and the whole idea needs to function within a 3-second window. So what's happening is people are rapidly consuming media. They're rapidly consuming content. And this AI stuff, I've got to admit, I've seen a few that I'm like, well, man, at a glance, if you didn't know better, you would just assume that's what it is, mm-hmm. And that's what worries me a little bit, is how much are people willing to scrutinize this stuff, because, mm-hmm. or will they learn to scrutinize it more, knowing that it's very easy to will they look for the sixth finger?
Most people won't. In general, there's a few concepts here that we can overlay that, one of them, and one of the most, I think, possibly relevant ones, is the concept of the big other. And the concept of the big other sort of says that most people don't really scrutinize or interrogate the information. They're just somewhat trusting, like, well, someone wouldn't do that. They trust the government. They trust the institution. They trust I'm not trying to say we shouldn't trust the government or the institution, but I'm saying there's a bit of sometimes the scenarios hardly bear any scrutiny. Like, if you just ask one question, you'll realize the whole thing kind of falls apart. Yeah. And they're not asking that one question, and at least the democratic system that I've grown up in, relies on opposing opposition, right? Mm-hmm. Where we have this sort of tension between sort of conservative and liberal sort of functions. And it's that tension between the two that there is no democracy without the official opposition, right? And so you need the opposition, which means you need people who are challenging. And that the only, the scientific method is literally, here's a theory, can we make the theory fail? Yeah. And so we're talking about all this, we believe in science stuff, but we don't actually believe in science. We believe in the big other. The idea that there are scientists who we can trust, who have figured it out. And when they say this, you should just fall in line and conform, is the concept of the big other. And the challenge with the human proclivity to follow the big other is in this scenario when we have a lot of false realities being put forth in 5-second clips. And if you're already preconditioned to just sort of trust in the big other, and you're not particularly good at asking questions, because, and I'm going to overlay a couple of concepts here, bear with me. I sent my kids to a different kind of school, and the school is very controversial. It's called the Waldorf School or Steiner School, which is famously made fun of in The Simpsons. That Maggie went to. But nonetheless, there's a bunch of them around the world, and there were some. Usually, the mother signs up the kid for Waldorf School. It's a very good feeling kind of school, and the engineer dads are always like, "Why aren't they running math drills?" And why aren't they teaching them to read in kindergarten? Right. And there's a different arc to all of this. And my response to that was always, I don't want you to teach my kid what to think. I want you to teach them how to think and how to rationalize, how to ask a question. And then when you realize you don't have the information, and this is what you are exceptionally good at and you've made your career on, is you've identified what you have to learn. You went and learned it, and then you applied it. And the world is changing as fast as our world is today. It's the people who can learn and relearn and then identify what they have to learn and then apply it, a solutions focus, because the gatekeepers of information are gone. You don't have to go to Oxford to get the best teacher to learn the information anymore. You just don't. The information is there. So what's really important now is how you process information, how you ask questions, and how you rationalize and interrogate the information. And so, anyways, back to our 5-second clips. It's this whole sort of idea of there's that tension I talked about with conservative and liberalism within Western democracies, and the official opposition is actually it plays out in many, many ways. And one of those ways is what you're talking about is sort of the TikTok culture, if you will, the 5-second sort of video or the shorts, actually has a strong counterweight, because there are cafes in Amsterdam where they put a big sign on the door, this is a cell phone free, no Wi-Fi zone, and it's packed. I already told you, my son is walking around with and the 46 isn't his oldest. He walks around with the box cameras. I don't even know what you call those ones.
Rolleiflex.
Basically, a Rolleiflex. He was in front of a church in Florence. He's looking down on this thing, and 2 old ladies walk by and go, "Look at him. He's so cool." Zach, the old ladies think you're hot. But there's this rejection of it. I was in a bar where there was 20-year-olds playing bingo with dabbers, like classic style. So although we do have this short attention span area, we also have a rise in interest in board games and in low tech. And I think that we're finding the equilibrium, and that's part of our humanity.
Okay. That's a lot to unpack. I like what you said at the end. I agree with pretty much most of what you said, but what you said at the end is kind of cool. Like, yes, we do still like board games. There is these processes and these rituals that people still enjoy. Like,
it's young people, not old people playing board games. It's young people adopting them for the first time, choosing to put away their phone and sit down and play an analog game over a beer, by the way. These are young people doing it in a bar. It's totally not, Coyote.
No. Okay. well, like I still buy records, right? I like buying music. I like having it. I like looking at the artwork while I listen to it. And if I listen to music, generally what I really love doing if I get free time is just to sit and listen to music. Now, when I go to buy and records are very popular here in China, Japan, Asia, Singapore as well. It blew me away. These shops are filled with people that are 20 years younger than me. They're not full of old farts. I'm like the oldest guy there by a mile. Right. So yeah, there is this interest in this analog tech and this old tech, but for me, there is a romantic thing there, yes, but it's something I've always done and like doing, But for them, I've often wondered. I'm like, what's the appeal for you guys? Like, where did it come from? And did it start as a curiosity? Like, because there's nothing convenient about listening to music on vinyl. And that's kind of why I like it.
We're caring for them.
Man. Yeah.
The nerve of putting the needle down is just like it's
or the shelf just slightly sagging in the middle, which I'm looking at right now. But yeah, the big other is a really interesting concept to me with people's acceptance of things. And this infallibility of just something. If they really saw the inner workings of it, they'd be like, oh, really? That's kind of what I trusted. I really liked Alan Moore's take on it. Alan Moore wrote, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, all that stuff. It's awesome writer. He was talking specifically about conspiracy theories, but this is linked. Because I'm an incredibly skeptical person. I really love debunking things. But he was saying he searched the world for conspiracy theories. I'm not gonna try quoting it all, because but what he was saying. Yeah, he said, and he found all of them were just nonsense. He said they were just rubbish. He said the terrifying reality that he found is that the world is pretty much rudderless. this is pretty nihilist, but it's Alan Moore, and he said what people are doing is they're creating something infallible to give them a sense of something being in control. And what I think is really interesting about that is there's sort of a nihilistic, panicky way of looking at it. But on the other side, what I think it is that people don't want to be as responsible for the world around them as they should feel, and they want to give that accountability for the way the world's being run and for the content in it and everything else. They want to give that to someone else. And in doing so, they just immediately just trust that body, and that to me is a bit of a weird point of view. But I've met people, very intelligent people, that they think that way, and some of them just choose to think that way to stay sane. But others, it kind of blows me away. It's not about flat Earth or anything like that. I'm not talking about that, so to speak. But it's like. Take someone like a close family member. They'll see something on the news and they'll just immediately believe it. And I'm like, well, that's probably bullshit. When I'm talking to them, and they're like, it can't be bullshit. It's on the news. They're not allowed to put lies on the news. I'm just like, what's happening is they're getting a sense of order. And that gives a sense of safety. But to me, I wouldn't trade opportunity and excitement and potential for safety. I think those are very different types of people. I think it is pretty chaotic, and the world can change in a heartbeat, and it is now. If you pay attention to AI and what's going on there, we're at the cusp of some pretty big changes, in my opinion. But a lot of people, they kind of don't necessarily want that. They're very comfortable, and they want to feel like they're being looked after and all the rest of it. But it can all just change in a heartbeat, for the better, for the worse. And historically it has. This is the thing. So, but to me, that's not a bad thing, because what a bad thing for me is when something starts to stagnate. I like history.
Well,
I like
you are attaching the idea of consistency and stagnation, which not everyone will accept that necessarily. But
this is the thing. I don't think we need to continuously wipe the slate clean. And I don't think developing something is a reason to respect to no longer respect what it was, or for what it once was to no longer be useful. But I think its evolution needs to occur. I don't think so. And this is and you're not the first person to make that point to me, because I've said it before. Because people are going, are you like conservative or what? And I'm like, no. This is what I mean. I like things being kept the way they are. I have no problem with that, but I still want to see what they become, and I still think things need to develop. There's a place for both of those things. There's the potential, and then there's the romance of history and just the desire of these things, even on a very base level. Sometimes we just like old things. I love antiques, because they've got a story. There's a history there. My wife is very puzzled by my obsession with lamps, but I'm like, I just don't read into it. I like old lamps. So
I gotta tell you, I have an unreasonable amount of light fixtures that we've purchased for this place, and my wife has literally said, "You cannot buy another light fixture until we have more furniture."
Something to sit on. It's just an empty room. It's beautifully lit.
So the point is, I actually feel you on this one, Kosta. So lamps, carry on.
No. Pick them. But I think there's definitely room for both of those things, and I like, for instance, with because I'm very, very into guitars. At the moment, and I've got a real love of old guitars, and I've got a real love of insane. And sometimes they can be both. This is the thing. I've got two 80s Steinbergers, and they're both the made in Newburgh and all this sort of thing. And at the time, It's so funny. Like those things were just honestly my favorite guitar design is the Steinberger. I think Ned Steinberger was great because I don't think he was a guitar player. So he kind of,
he's still not.
Yeah, still not.
Yeah.
So he kind of made these things make sense to him. And what you ended up with was this thing. And man, like I said, I'm a little guy. So I pick up a Steinberger and I'm like, hell yeah, this is exactly the right size. Everything about it makes sense. You know, it doesn't warp. Well, apparently they do, but mine certainly haven't. You know, and they sound great. They work really well. All the rest of it. I really love that design. But what's interesting now is that's considered kind of retro, almost like the Jetsons guitar. Yes. You know, and I can't buy the damn things anymore because they're so expensive to find the ones I want. But you know, that to me is a really good example of why. Of course, we all love Strats, Tellys, Les Pauls, things like that, you know, and I pick one of them up and I really like it, and you can tell why people liked it. But I really like the Steinberger as well, and I've got a Strandberg and a couple of other. I've got one of Adriano's guitars as well, which is old and new. Yeah, the Ergon. But the thing is, these things are kind of blends of old and new. They're all evolutions of something. And they get old, but that doesn't make them irrelevant. Right. You know, it's not like they've been thrown away because something better came along. I don't think it should work like that. That's why people still use film. They still use, you know, all sorts of. I mean, I have probably one of the best digital camera bodies you can buy right now, which is the GFX Fuji 100 II. Which is, you know, obscene spec-wise. But I still very frequently put pretty crappy old lenses on that thing. You know, and why? Because they look a certain way.
Yeah.
And nothing else kind of looks like that. You know,
we did a film shoot for the Donovan Lee Guitar Company, and on the front page of their website right now is a digital photo with an old Russian lens, which turned yellow and is radioactive, I think, actually.
Is it a Zenit, the lens?
You'll have to ask Zach when the podcast is over, because Zach took the shot, you know. But it has, it's a digital camera, but the lens itself made it look like it was an old film. And I think there's something about it that's also broken, where I think it's just wide open. The lens is
always wide open,
wide open, you know, and so it's a bit grainy, but the thing is, it evoked emotion within us.
Yeah.
When we looked at the photo, we went, "Oh, that's actually what we're going for." And when I look at the video demos that we shot for the brand, I like them, but I kind of wish they looked a little bit more like.
Yeah,
we didn't try doing that, you know, because we weren't trying to make them look like the videos had been highly edited. The whole point was, here's one mic, the guitar, this is something of what it really sounds like, kind of thing, right? Yeah. But anyways, that idea of the historical sort of connection, you know, what you're talking about is actually a large part of the work that I've done. I actually regularly talk on the unwritten future of guitar, and I encapsulate both the golden years and the futurism. And that within the arc of acceptance curve, that we have early adopters, which is interesting because you are an early adopter and an innovator very clearly to me, but you also have a great appreciation for sort of the last phase of the acceptance curve is called the laggards. And I don't think you're a laggard by any means, but that last 16%, you know, adopts innovation. Well, the 16% doesn't. The middle 70% sort of adopts the innovation into the culture, and then the conservatives take it and they literally conserve it and care for it and make sure. And they'll introduce societies. You know, they'll put on museum shows. Yeah. You know, music's like classical music. Like there's a blues society in Australia. I know there is. I have a friend who gets awards for it every year, right?
And you know, because he's the only one in it.
Yeah. You teach jazz in the universities at this point in time, and there's a pop university in Mannheim, Germany, and the music that we call modern today will one day, if it's cared for, be conserved by somebody, and it's going to take a considerable effort, and there will be people who donate to it and make sure that future generations know about it, and that's the conservative nature, you know. And so when we look at, now let's tie in one other concept there. When we think about Schumpeter's concepts of creative destruction in the economic sense, you know, when you talked about the fact that we need to have new things, but we shouldn't necessarily throw away the old, we will only discard the old when it becomes irrelevant because there's just a much better way to take care of that need. For instance, like a refrigerator versus an icebox. Mm. An icebox is inconvenience. The ice turns to water. It gets wet. You have to dump it out. Your meat goes bad. If you have an electric refrigerator, it's simply a better version. And so nobody's trying to maintain an icebox anymore, unless you're going to the beach. Then we call it a cooler. It's the same thing. We throw ice in it. We go to the beach with it. But there is a reason for things to go away. We don't need to unnecessarily hang on to old concepts or old technology if, like the scientific method, we disprove that they're no longer the best version of that, and we can move on and evolve.
Yeah. Well, yeah, some things do just go away. It's not so much a choice. What I think would be hilarious, though, is if you get some guy contacting you from the West German Society of Vintage Fridges that says, actually, there's a very big group of people collecting old fridges. I wouldn't be surprised.
I would love that, and I'd be super interested in seeing them actually in the Soviet design. And what did they do with this? I mean, that sort of brutalist communist sort of look. What does a communist refrigerator even look like? I don't know.
But it's I mean, some things do just go away, some things, they all break down or whatever. But I think it's not so much an argument of things being discarded or retired. Mm-hmm. It's more that the concept's not forgotten. I'm a big believer that at least everything should be recorded, not in a creepy way. I mean, I would just like to think that the existence of everything that has been made or had a purpose or was part of human life, is somehow recorded for prosperity and for history, and we can know about it. Because I think that the further along society, because I mean I work in a very technical field. Mm-hmm. Where there is no single individual that has all the knowledge, in that field in their head. Mm-hmm. There just isn't. Mm-hmm. And we're all just standing on the shoulders of whoever came before, really, So I think it is kind of, I enjoy it looking back and saying, okay, well, where did this all start, and what did this come from and how did this work? And trying to understand that. I think that's an enjoyable thing, probably a very, a bit of an indulgent thing. But the idea of just throwing it away and forgetting it, to me, is not appealing. But society will, forget about things. That's true. Different cultures will forget about things. It's
usually based on a need, though. There's no longer a need. We only have so much capacity to take care of things, to go to things, to be a part of something, and there's something else that meets that need, well, at least perceivably for the person better, like the very, if the evolutionary sort of idea that we're basically just survival machines with replicator cells, if we can look at Dawkins' sort of work, which is widely accepted at this point in time, and I know there's going to be a lot of people take issue with it, but if we, from a molecular level, I mean, we're basically little cells which perceive movement and move towards what's good for us and move away from what's bad for us. And then we became groups of cells, and to this date, the first. If we look at Adam Smith's observations on the wealth of nations, when he talks about you can reliably count on people to take care of their own interests rather than hope for their benevolence, he's not saying people are inherently selfish. He's just saying that people have to take care of their needs. Their survival literally depends on it, and so fundamentally, we are predisposed to move towards the things that take care of our needs and away from those that don't. And as a result, there will be things that take care of needs better than others, and things that, evolutionarily speaking, don't have a good strategy and fail to exist in the future.
Yeah, but to make an interesting point on that note,
That wasn't an interesting point. Is that a veiled criticism?
No,
to make an interesting
no.
point on that. Sorry, Costa.
let me segue on that. No. What I'm so an interesting angle to, because I think we can all kind of agree that I don't know of many things that are kind of at odds with what you just said, without being too long-winded. But for instance, we were talking earlier about. I'm like, why are people buying records? Why aren't they just listening on Spotify? But on that topic, it's because why I do it is because just listening to music on Spotify isn't satisfying a particular need that I have. Could you call it a need? I would call it a desire. But the two kind of blur for those of us that are not hungry and out in the cold.
That's right.
So, for other people they may have identified the same thing. I don't really know. But so there are things that we didn't think we needed because convenience is the god of all now. Get more of it, get it faster. Get it, more concentrated. People really think this way. But then you get it, and I don't know, maybe people are just completely ODing on dopamine or something. There's definitely something to that. But there's no satisfaction there. So, the fact that we're at a point where there is a contingent of society fortunate enough to have to force itself to slow down is really interesting to me. Because I don't think we're spiritual beings or anything like that. I'm not really into that. I'm pretty. I wouldn't say pessimistic and bleak. I just think things are the way they are, and I'm not into these magical concepts of mojo and stuff like that. Sometimes we use them to describe things that that take quite a while. We talk about this magical moment, but what we're actually talking about is something happening to your perceptors. You're perceiving something, you're feeling something, you're remembering something. Like we get it with scents, with fragrances. You go, oh, that's magic, but really you're just triggering a bunch of memories or whatever, or pleasantries linked to something. So there's no magic to that, to me anyway. And I fight endlessly with people about this concept, but that's how I look at things. And I think part of I really like. There's two people I really, really, really grew up liking. One of them was Carl Sagan, who was just incredible in the 80s because, like as you know, we didn't have internet. Well, maybe someone did, but I don't think it came around till the 90s. But so. These were concepts that suddenly appeared on broadcast TV in Australia, that were just blowing my mind, even as a kid, and I was very young. So that what that guy was saying was just insane to me. Pulsars, all this stuff, and the way he spoke and the way he communicated in a very unpatronizing way. I don't think we've really gotten anyone quite like that since. The other one was a guy called James Randi. I don't know if you know about James Randi, the amazing Randy, his name was.
No, but a much more interesting name than Carl Sagan. Much more sellable. Amazing Randy.
But he started as a magician, right? He was a magician, but he had something called the James Randi Fund, which was $1 million sitting in a bank account for anyone that could prove they had supernatural powers, right? And that money is still there. So, and you would go on with your claim, and it was on TV a couple of times as well. You would go on in your claim, and James Randi would test your claim. That you could see auras, that you could do this sort of stuff, and it was all bullshit. Like no one could do any of this stuff. They could. Everyone has a story about it, can recount it. People talk about ghosts, all this stuff, but when it comes to the $1 million sitting in the bank account, no one could prove it. And I remember really liking that guy because where he was coming from wasn't smugness. He wasn't a smug guy. He was the most adorable looking old man. He looked like a little wizard. It was awesome. But his whole point was that this deception that people did ultimately did prey on a lot of people. This idea that there's this this imperceivable, immeasurable thing that you need to respect, and there's this magic, and you get it in guitars a lot, actually, like hi-fi equipment. James Randi actually challenged a guy once who did a cable review. And he made these sonic claims, and James Randi actually challenged him. He said, "These claims require superhuman hearing. If you can prove this, I will give you the $1 million." And the guy, of course, could not. It was a lot of nonsense. So the thing about that was, it was this idea of debunking, and this idea that there's the perception of magic, there's the feeling of something beyond your understanding, which is great. It's an awesome feeling, when you see something, you're like, wow. But you have to know at a certain point in your life that there's a reason for that happening, and there's probably a perfectly logical explanation. There might be a very complicated one, but at some level that will make sense beyond, the Mars aligned with Venus and blah 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 and all this sort of nonsense.
Yes.
People go on about. So that's kind of the thing, that absence of actual magic. It's hugely important to me, and getting into film. When we looked at these film effects, the first thing I looked at when I saw them is, how the fuck did they do that? And I just really, really had to figure it out. And I think you figure it out now, and I'm like, I could explain it in the coldest way possible to someone. Yeah. And I go to see a movie, and I don't enjoy big effects films, right? Because I just see, a lot of overtime and a lot of work and a lot of pizza parties to say thank you. There are a couple I like, but the ones I really love, and this is kind of interesting, a movie that I would describe as magical. A friend took me to see a movie recently called Perfect Days. I don't know if you know about this. It's a movie about a Japanese toilet cleaner made by Wim Wenders is the guy that made it. He did a film called Paris, Texas many years ago. A lot of people know about. And this movie is freaking magical, but there's no visual effects in it. It's just describing this guy's daily life and his experiences and his emotional responses to things. And it's very slow, very purposeful. But at the end of it, you have this connection with this guy on this screen, and it's a magical thing. And some people may ask, well, how did you do that? And he did it because this guy who made this film is a master of cinema language and how to craft a film. So that magic is still there. It's not big explosions and Thanos turning everyone to dust, but it's still there, because those special effects, they're not so special anymore. They're just effects. But those movies that really move us, those films that completely just leave us kind of thinking for 2 days, that to me is still pretty magical. And there's a real art to that I think is difficult to excel at. There's so many little elements you need to orchestrate to get a movie to work that well.
Thank you for watching and listening to Life with Strings Attached. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation so far. We'll continue in part 2 next week.